Happy Sunday. Yeah, Sunday. Happy Sunday. I'm giddy. I'm giddy after last night and the last 24 hours because we did this fundraiser, this legal defense fundraiser. Actually, that's not what I wanted to put up. That's our guest coming up. But we had done that last night. I mailed some stickers out today to some of the people who donated. If you donated or if you intend to donate, and like let's say by tomorrow morning, you can send an email to mjcboston1 at yahoo.com and get one of our Young Jelly stickers with our Young Jerk stickers. And it's for the Legal Defense Fund that I just started yesterday. And some trolls are going nuts at me about it, which is funny. I expected that. But what I didn't quite expect was how many of you would step up immediately without like any questions asked. I haven't even gotten into all the details of what's going on here. I know a lot of people have questions about it, but I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good about what's going on with my attorney. I have one of the best attorneys around for this, but I'm also feeling good about all the people who stepped up and donated in the last 24 hours. We're at $7,000, $7,083 right now, which is wow. I just can't thank you all enough. Yeah, so that I'm happy about that. That's like makes me feel really good. Like morale wise, to know that many people really care about the show and care about me and care about making sure I have the best legal defense for this lawsuit that's been filed against me. Thank you. Uh, so we had a great show last night with Nan Gallagher. We have another great show today. We have a journalist here. I want to know in my microphone. I've been messing with my mic. I'm trying to get my mic, this new mic that I have, trying to get the settings right. It's very difficult. They don't teach you how to get the settings right. I want to know if I sound any better, sound any worse tonight. Just let me know. I want to know. All right, you guys help me out. All right, so let's bring up the guest tonight. This is going to be fun. I did say fun, but it's not that fun because it's another tough subject. But that's what we do here. What's fun about it is that I like supporting journalists, local journalists. I know this guy, this man for a long time, Andrew, and he's done a lot of journalism over the years. Does a lot of FOIA requests. He follows up on a lot of police issues, corruption issues. He's uncovered quite a bit. He's an independent journalist in Massachusetts. He's got a website, a Substack, newsletter, email, blog, whatever you call it. He's doing major journalism, and he's been covering this story that we had him on the show discussing in the past about the fire in Beverly, Mass, and how this man was jailed for decades. And with new information and kind of even new science about fires and arson investigations, it was really revealed that the evidence against him was all BS. And Andrew's been covering it, and since then, there's been quite a bit that's happened for this gentleman that's been locked up for decades. And Andrew's story is featured, the latest update is featured on his blog that we have pinned in the chat right now. So I hope you check that out and follow him. Make sure you subscribe to his blog and email list. It's all about this. It's also in the appeal. It's in coordination with Boston Institute of Nonprofit Journalism. And so I'm happy to have Andrew back to talk about this story that we're going to put up on the screen. No, no, now I got the wrong one. Let me before I bring it up, let's bring up the story first on the screen, and then we'll bring up Andrew. Whew. One thing at a time. I got to breathe today. I'm like speechless. I gotta say, after all of you stepped up last night. I want to bring up. Hold on. There it is. This is the mass dump. This is his newsletter. I'm subscribed to it. The story is called "They Took My Life Away for Nothing." James Carver spent 36 years. I said decades. 36 years in prison after he was convicted of setting one of the deadliest fires in Massachusetts history. But after reviewing new scientific evidence, a judge set him free. Andrew's been the one covering this. Happy to have him back on the show to discuss his latest update on this. Andrew, how you doing today?
Hey Mike, how's it going?
Good.
Pretty good.
You feeling good about your coverage here? I remember last time we came on, there was a couple people who were got a little bit, upset. I think one of them was related to one of the victims of the fire, which I could totally understand why they would be upset by us covering this. But at the same time, courts ruled in his favor, right? So, like, tell us what's going on your latest story and how you feeling about it, because I gotta think you're feeling pretty good about what's been happening here. Maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have actually been working on this story for since July of 2023, and this story you posted is the latest one, but I've written a number of articles about this case. What so this guy James Carver, he was from Danvers, and he's convicted of setting this really horrific fire in Beverly, Massachusetts. This was back in July 4th, 1984. And it was basically immediately blamed on arson. Like they told the officials, state and local, told the media the day after this fire happened, case arson. And this fire killed 15 people. So it was one of the deadliest fires in the history of the state. Um, Prior to this, the deadliest fire is the Coconut Grove fire, which is a really infamous fire at a nightclub that killed, I think, actually close to 500 people. So this wasn't on that level, but it's 15 people is a horrific fire, and it's the deadliest that's occurred since then. Um, and as I said, this guy James Carver was convicted of it, but he was recently set free after 36 years in prison. What the judge found were sort of two pieces of the two key pieces of evidence in the case were flawed. One deals with eyewitness testimony, placing James Carver at the scene. Basically, the judge said this testimony was not reliable, and we have a lot of new science that shows there's problems with eyewitness testimony, and many of those factors that render eyewitness testimony unreliable were present in this case. But sort of the main issue is actually, was this fire even arson in the first place? Because a, a thing that happens in so well, let me say this. When in some cases it's really obvious when there's a crime that's happened, right? Like if someone is shot in the back of the head and there's no gun at the scene, it couldn't have been a suicide. Someone had to have shot that person, right? It's just a question of, was it, murder, manslaughter, self-defense, whatever. But there are cases where you can, the investigators have to find out whether a crime happened at all. And arson is one of those issues where it's really tricky. And one of the sort of scary things about sort of investigations going wrong and bad forensic science, and a lot of these things that come up in wrongful conviction cases is like, if the police have this forensic evidence that may be flawed and they decide a crime, it's a it becomes a case at this point of, okay, well, who did the crime, right? Because they've already got one piece, which is a crime happened. Now they just need to find, a bunch of circumstantial evidence to pin it on someone. And in a case like arson, if you think someone said it, it's like, okay, well, who can we find that was near the building, and who might have had a motive to set this fire and all this stuff. But if you're starting from a flawed premise that it was arson, then you're going to get the wrong person, because nobody's even guilty in the first place. And it's still sort of an open question how this fire started. But the problem is, in this case, you had a fire investigator who said this fire was started with a flammable liquid, and there's basically forensic evidence that proves that. But that evidence was flawed. It was based on basically old, like, wives' tales, myths, folklore about how fires start. And in reality, there was no evidence whatsoever that this fire was started with a flammable liquid. And when you say a fire was started with a flammable liquid, you're saying somebody did it on purpose. Someone dumped a bunch of, gasoline or whatever, kerosene, whatever, and lit a match or a lighter or something and started the fire. But there's actually no evidence that that happened here. And that
Didn't
is
the evidence kind of point to the opposite, that there was no flammable? Like they had. I mean, usually you can tell, right? If there's flammable, like if there's gasoline added, they can tell.
well,
And in this
you
case,
can
they
do lab
basically
tests.
found the opposite of that, right?
You can do lab tests, and they'll tell you whether they can detect it or not. But there's a tricky issue, because just because no flammable liquid is present doesn't mean it wasn't used to start the fire, because it could get this there were, like, I think, thousands of gallons of water pumped into this building, and so um, water can wash away that stuff, but you can't just say, well, it could have gotten washed away, therefore this must have been how it happened. That's not, this to do it scientifically, you need actual evidence. You need the lab tests. At this point, if you have no actual lab tests, you're just speculating. Unless you have a video of someone pouring it and lighting the fire, then you don't really know without the lab test. You're just guessing, and you can't guess when someone's life is on the line, which is what happened in this case. This man James Carver was sentenced to not just one, but actually two consecutive lifetimes in prison. So um, he he did have the option to seek parole, but he decided to focus on getting his case overturned, because he didn't want to go before the parole board and say, I did this, because he, is strongly insisting that he's been innocent this whole time. Um, but I can, you got one of them up, but I can actually show people a bunch of photos from this.
We
One of
do
the things
that.
that's been incredible.
Before we do that, we got someone in the
Yeah.
chat that is
Oh, sure.
saying he's guilty, and I think they were there. I think, or their family was there. Um, and I just want to post some comments because I don't want to ignore them.
Yeah.
You
Could
know.
you just show me which one?
Yeah, here's Candy Heart. She says Carver's girlfriend was in the rooming house with another man. Carver was a taxi driver. Nancy was a taxi driver. Also, someone murdered Nancy. Unsolved
Okay.
1984. What is your comments about this? That and
There's
she's
two
saying that he's guilty, that he did it.
pieces I can address here. So first, one is, she said Carver's girlfriend was in the rooming house with another man. So the prosecutor's allegation in this case, or the prosecutor argued that what James Carver's motive was he had an ex fiance, kind of like his like high school sweetheart, um, and that they broke up, and then he went on a couple dates with this other guy who lived in the rooming house, and James Carver had some sort of conversation that people allege, this is the night before the fire. They had this conversation. They both worked next to each other, and they spoke to each other on the sidewalk outside of their respective places of employment. And several people said that James Carver threatened this guy who lived in the rooming house. His name was Rick Nickerson. Um, and it, uh, this is sort of in dispute, because all three of them gave different accounts of what James Carver said, and two of them didn't come forward to the police until years after the fire, which, at that point, their memories are going to be very problematic, and there's questions of why they're coming forward so long after instead of right away. Like, so one of these people who alleged a threat, he didn't come forward until the police called him after James Carver was already arrested, and it was in the newspaper that James Carver was accused of doing this fire. And he was actually a close friend of Rick Nickerson, the guy who died in the fire. So you would think that if this guy heard James Carver threatening him the night before his home burns down and he dies, that he would come forward to the police right away, but that didn't happen. Um, but to get to the person's point that James Carver's, ex girlfriend, ex fiance was in the rooming house. She was not. She was actually testified and was not with him that night. And she was not hurt in the fire. She was not killed. She was not actually there. And in fact, Rick Nickerson, the guy who Carver is alleged to have threatened for dating his ex, was actually on a date with a different woman the night before the fire. He this woman did not testify, but she spoke with police. There's police records about it. She was actually there when this threat supposedly happened. She said to the police, "I didn't hear the conversation. I don't know what was said." And Rick Nickerson later that night, we spoke to each other, but he never mentioned anything about what James Carver said to him. So, you'd think if he was threatened and he was rattled by it, he might have said something to this girl he was on a date with, or if this was a really loud argument and he was screaming a threat at him, you'd think that this girl would have heard something. But there are actually multiple witnesses who said they didn't hear what had happened. Uh, and so, it's sort of a questionable what exactly happened here. Whether and even if this threat did occur, it doesn't mean that James Carver set the fire. Um, so, um,
Just say
I'm sorry.
that.
What was the second part? What was the second part of that comment? I'm
I
sorry.
think you got
Yeah.
it all.
Well, no, there was one other part, which some
We'll
people.
put
This
it
is a
back up.
thing
There it is.
that people have been talking about. This person said someone murdered Nancy, unsolved. This was another case. A woman named Nancy Merson who was stabbed to death in Beverly shortly after the fire. It's still, it's a cold case. It's never been solved. But there's been a rumor that whoever killed Nancy Merson um, killed her basically because she knew who set the fire. And this is all just total rumor mill stuff. I have never found any evidence to substantiate that, and I've not looked at. I don't have access to what's in the investigation for Nancy Merson, but I've reviewed all of the Carver stuff, and if they thought that who set the fire uh, killed this woman, there would have been evidence in there. If they thought James Carver did it, if they had any evidence, I'm sure they would have charged him with it. But that's never happened. Um,
And did
I
the police
I
ever
don't think
even
there's anything to that.
Let me ask you this: do you think the police even ever investigated him for that? Is there?
There's
There's no
references
evidence of
to
that
it.
at all, right?
They asked certain people about it, but I I don't want to go too far into it. I'm trying to remember
Okay.
exactly what it was, but I remember like
Yeah.
one time they talked to some guys and were like, "We heard that you were talking about a connection," and they were like, "Oh, we were just you know
Bullshit.
uh, shooting the shit with each other and saying, wouldn't it be crazy if this happened?" They weren't saying they knew anything about this.
They were
I haven't
speculating.
seen any evidence to substantiate this. Um,
It's what we call an old wives' tale. I would go back to Candy. I know Candy's probably watching right now. Considering everything that Andrew said, does your mind change a little bit? That maybe James, do you even consider that James could be innocent? That you've taken in stuff that's not true, because I think Andrew's got a good answer for everything that you've asked, and so far he's not found anything to back it up. It seems more old wives' tale. So I wonder about Candy if she would even consider this guy's innocent. This guy did 35 years in jail. Andrew, you want to go on and talk more about this and show your
yeah, well,
slides
why
and
don't I
what
just
you got? Talk
let
a
me
little
just
about the
talk.
story.
Let me talk a tiny bit first about the fire, just because, for reference, because this is sort of like a very interesting story, but it's kind of like forgotten about. So this building, Mike's got a picture of it on the screen, actually. You can see it's on fire. The fire's pretty bad. You can clearly see there's fire on the second floor, and there's a lot of smoke obscuring the third floor, but I believe the third floor is also on fire at that time. And this building was a rooming house. It was at the corner of Elliott and Rantoul Street. It's got like a drugstore and some other businesses on the first floor, and the second and third floor were a rooming house. You had, I believe, about 36 people living there at the time, and 15 people died. Um, and basically, there was a cop who was patrolling. It was like 4 in the morning, and this bakery owner was like trying to get his attention, so he stops his cruiser, and the bakery owner is pointing down the street, and there's this fire going on. So you probably can't see it, but basically he's the cop is racing down the street to get to this building that's on the corner of the street, and he arrives there. And that picture Mike had up a second ago is the closest thing we can get to what he would have seen at the time. The second and third floor were on fire. the fire truck was not there when he arrived, but it arrived pretty soon after because he immediately radioed the police station. But they, I can show you a few other. There's some pretty amazing photos of this fire. I'm just gonna share my screen real quick. Apologies if it shows this like endless recursion thing real quick. Um, uh, all right. So can you see my screen now, Mike? Whoops.
I gotta stop the other one and bring it up. Are you ready? You on the slide you want to be? I see the
Yeah,
slides are
go ahead.
moving. All
Show.
right. There you go.
So this is the picture we were just looking at, and this is like right when the fire department arrived, and the police officer I mentioned, when he arrived at the building, he ran around the side, and you can see at the bottom of this photo here, there's a man on the sidewalk. That man actually jumped out of the third story window and died. And the police officer standing over him is actually a different person. But this fire was so bad that the police officer got to it within a couple minutes of it starting, and people were already in such danger that they were jumping out of this fire, the window. So this fire spread really quick. Um, and Oops, sorry everybody. And you can see here they were able to save 9 people from the building. This photo is depicting some firefighters with a ladder, and they're escorting a woman out of the window. And if you look, you can see there's fire in her room. There's like red, some orange glowing behind her. So these people, were literally trapped in their rooms. They could not get out of the room, and they needed ladder rescues. And a couple people were able to jump and survive as well. They didn't wait for the fire because they were in, such immediate danger. But you can see from this picture, the fire, like, this
Yeah.
like engulfed the upper floors of the building. Like there's, no way someone who was not didn't get out of there is going to survive. This is just a horrific fire. It basically gutted the second and third floor. And you saw in the first couple pictures this was happening at nighttime, and in this picture where there's a crowd gathered that's watching, and the third floor is still very much on fire, and this is like daylight by now. So this fire, really went on for a long time. It took them a long time to put it out. And you can see from this photo, I don't know exactly what day it was taken, but shortly after the fire, I believe this is like the roof of the building, and you can see there's just totally burned up, you know, material. This building, just got absolutely destroyed. And it was just it was awful. It killed so many people. And um, I think when there's a really horrific event, often we want to blame someone. And I think that's part of why, in cases, you can get people jumping immediately to the idea that it was a crime. Um, but what is Carver, and I can show you a picture of him when he was young, and I can show you a picture of him uh, when he was older as well, because so this is him shortly before all of this happened. He was 20 when the fire happened. He went on trial about 5 years later. So he was about 25 when he was sentenced to life in prison, and um, he's now a 61-year-old man. He uses a wheelchair to get around. He has difficulty standing, mobility issues. um, and Let me just show you. Uh, Here we go. So this is him being wheeled into court at his bail hearing recently. He's in a wheelchair. Um, he had a tumor that was removed from his brain about 20 years ago, and it caused him to lose some of his like motor skills, and he has trouble hearing in one of his ears and is deaf in the other. He uses you'll see it possibly in some of the other pictures that he had to wear headphones when he's in court because of his hearing problem. So he's had a number of physical health setbacks since he's been in prison. And again, uh, uh, compared to that picture I just showed you when he was so young, a lot, he's been in prison a long time, and for something he's always said that he didn't do. And um, I, so we talked a lot about the evidence in this case, but I'll show you sort of why um, they jumped on the idea that this fire was arson. Um, so I'm going to share my screen again. Can you see my screen, Mike? Yep. Can you see? You can see it now.
Yes.
So this is um, this is the entrance to the rooming house, which, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, it was called the Elliott Chambers Rooming House. And there's a doorway in an alcove, and this led to a stairway which took you to the second and third floors of the building where all the people lived. And if you look in the corner, you can see there's some, like, most of this is burned up. It's all black, but in the corner next to the door, there's some green paint that survived the fire. You can see it better in this photo. It's closer up. So basically, there was a fire investigator who they brought in from New York who looked at this building, and he said that so a firefighter actually found a bundle of newspapers that was wedged in this corner, and where the green paint is. And the investigator said that the fire started on that newspaper bundle after someone doused it with a flammable liquid and set it on fire. And the way he came to this conclusion is this burning you can see now that's on the walls of this alcove. This is a close-up picture of it. He said that that's something called alligator charring, and it's a term they use because it looks kind of like alligator skin. And sort of the idea here is that um, you if a fire burns really hot, um, then it will cause this alligator charring, but it won't be very deep because of how fast the fire spread, essentially. And so he said that's only possible if you have something to accelerate the fire and make it like burn hotter and faster. But that is actually not true. It's a myth. There's no evidence for this. It's completely rejected by scientists who study fire, and it's considered, improper to testify to this now. No one would say that now, but it was something that he said, back in 1989 when this case was tried. And you can also see on the outside of this alcove, you can see this kind of like black smudged material that's in like the lower, next to the door on this white part of the wall. He said that was, he called it a smoke swirling stain, and basically said that you only get this type of stain if a flammable liquid is used, and that also is just it's made up. It's not true. There's no science backing it up. No one would testify to that today. And the investigator also said he concluded that the fire started on these newspapers at the ground level because fire can't spread down. He said it only goes up. And that is also not true. So James Carver brought in his own expert who said basically, if you look at the damage here, what actually happened is the fire started above the doorway. And he said that you can tell because if you go back and look at these walls, the burning is pretty, he called it like superficial, like it was, I think, like a quarter inch deep or so. But if you go and look at the above the doorway, like you can see there's wood that's like there's pieces of it missing. There's wood that's like totally burned all the way through. If you go back and look at this picture, if you look above the doorway, you can see that like parts of the metal are hanging down. Like there was, tremendous damage up here, whereas less damage on
I'm
the
below.
walls. And he was saying that's because the fire started up here. And so he said the way it probably it might have spread downward is that you have what's called drop down burning. So you'd have
That's right.
flaming material that's in the ceiling. It would, fall down to the
That happened in 9/11. I mean,
yeah, it was
the floors
yeah,
below caught fire and stuff because of the plane hitting up top, like so it definitely happens.
yeah, he was saying basically the piece of the ceiling falls down, it's on
Right.
fire. It might set the newspapers on fire. It might
Right.
set the walls on fire. That could be how it spread downward. And that is something that they just didn't do enough to consider back in the 80s when they looked into this case. And ultimately, though, the biggest piece of evidence that convinced the judge, who's Jeffrey Karp, Essex County Superior Court Judge Jeffrey Karp is the one who overturned Carver's convictions. Sort of the main piece he looked at was there's no evidence that this was started with a flammable liquid, and they told people it was. And if there's no evidence it was started with a flammable liquid, that raises a question: was this fire even deliberately set in the first place? And it's something that wasn't really at issue in the original trial. The defense kind of just conceded, yeah, this was arson, but my client didn't do it. Whereas if you tried the case today, you'd be saying, where's the evidence anybody even started this? There's no evidence of a flammable liquid. There's no lab test proving it. It's just speculation. You don't know that the fire started on the newspapers. We have an expert who's going to say that it didn't, and he's, extremely qualified. And um, he actually the expert, his name is uh, Craig Byler. He's a like a fire safety engineer, and he actually worked on the manual that they use now when they're investigating fires, like the scientific standards that you would follow if you're doing a proper fire investigation. He like worked on, like he didn't write it himself. It's like written by a committee, but he was on that committee. So this guy is like, he's qualified. He knows what he's talking about. And he said you can't prove that this fire was arson. And he said that the original investigators basically didn't do enough to rule out that it could have been an electrical fire. And if you go back and look at those photos, you can actually see wires like hanging in the alcove. And they just kind of did a really cursory look at it and barely considered whether it was an electrical fire back in the 80s. And they just didn't really collect the evidence. There's no close-up photos of anything. They don't even know like whether the building had like a circuit breaker or not. Like that's how little we know about the electrical system. So it's entirely possible this was an electrical fire. They did Craig Byler made the point that this was like the entrance to a building, so you'd expect there to be a light above your head so that if you're trying to like use your keys in the middle of the night, you'd have a light. And you can't see a light in those pictures. There isn't one there. But they never like searched the ground to see if, oh, did like a light fall on the ground after the fire started? Could there have been a light up there that could have been, the electrical source of the fire? Like they just didn't consider any of those things. They just said, oh, well, there's like this alligator char and stuff, and there's this stain from the smoke on the side of the building. So it was arson. And now we just got to find out who did it. And they ultimately settled on James Carver because he supposedly had this motive that we discussed before about, his ex-girlfriend dating this guy who he wasn't even dating at the time. And uh, so there's more to the story in terms of why they um, sort of focused on him. But it's sort of weird because they initially focused on him. Seemingly, it's unclear. They got like an anonymous tip, and then they started questioning people, and they found out about this alleged threat from the only person who mentioned it, back in the 80s. And then they sort of focused on James Carver from that point. But what happened was, what's up? Oh, Mike's going away. I'll just keep talking until he gets back. Um, so there was a woman who testified in the case who was a friend of James Carver, and she said that James Carver actually confessed to setting this fire. And this, I think, is sort of the biggest piece of evidence. In fact, the district attorney at the time, uh, Burke, I can't remember his first name, Kevin Burke was DA at the time. He said basically we needed like after James Carver was arrested, he said this was the piece of evidence that allowed us to make the arrest and file the charges. We needed this friend's testimony about this supposed confession. And this woman, she said that James Carver told her this confession in, I think, October 1984, which was a few months after the fire. The fire was July 1984. But she didn't say anything to the police until um, March 1987, so like a couple years later. And she had actually, before the alleged confession happened, she had already spoken with the police. So like she knew how to get in touch with them. I mean, not that it's complicated, you just call the police department, right? But she said James Carver confessed to me a few months after the fire, and I made one phone call to the police, and they said the detective wasn't in, so I didn't leave him my name, I didn't leave a message, I just hung up the phone and I never called. And then they found out about the confession somehow a couple of years later, and they call her. By this point, she doesn't even live in Massachusetts anymore. Um, and she tells them about this supposed confession for the first time. And then, on the trial in 1989, she testifies about this supposed confession, which um, the judge who overturned James Carver's case, he pointed out that because she waited so long, it just raises questions like, was her memory accurate? Can you rely on this? And he also pointed out this witness claimed that she told, I can't remember how many other people it was, but a number of other people, including a Beverly firefighter who I believe was actually at the fire, who, would have had a reason to tell the police or the DA's office about it. None of these people went forward either. So they found out about it from some completely unrelated person who she had never talked to about this, if I remember. I could be wrong about that. I don't remember how this person found out about it. Someone's asking what's her name. I don't think it's necessary to share that. I don't do the whole true crime thing of like invading everybody's privacy. I try to, um, but this woman, there's a number of issues with her testimony, which is, obviously the fact that she came forward, but there's some other things. One is like when you get a confession, if to know that a confession is reliable, because we know there's such a thing as false confessions, you want the person to confess information that only the perpetrator would know. Only the police might know it, but they haven't shared it with the public yet, right? So the police immediately after this fire happened said, we believe it started on this bundle of newspapers and that it was arson. So that's not information that only, the person who started the fire would know. She said he claimed he poured gasoline on it, but there's no evidence corroborating that. There's no proof that, I mean, it matches what their theory of the case was, but there's no evidence to corroborate it. So whether it's true or not, it doesn't really, prove anything. Or rather, it doesn't. There's no scientific evidence to back it up. But then on top of it, her the supposed confession that she relays is also conflicts with the evidence in a lot of ways. Like she said, James Carver followed his ex-girlfriend and the guy she had gone on a couple dates with, Rick Nickerson, followed them back to the rooming house shortly before setting the fire. But as I mentioned earlier, his ex-girlfriend wasn't on a date with that guy. She wasn't at the rooming house. So if James Carver did confess to it in that way, that's one of the things you look for to determine whether a confession is false or not. Like if someone's making a false confession, they're just making stuff up, like they will get the details wrong because they don't know what happened. Like, so that's possibly evidence of, a false confession. It's possibly evidence that the witness didn't know what she was talking about and was making it up. It could go either way. Um, and there's other stuff, but I think that was one of the most striking things, is that she claimed that he followed these people back to the rooming house when there's no evidence. Not only no evidence that it happened, but the evidence proves that it didn't happen. Um, so, and just when James Carver was on trial, his original trial lawyer said that James Carver, this is during his closing argument, he said James Carver actually did confess or he made these statements anyway, but that they weren't, he wasn't being, that he basically, he said it was a false confession, that James Carver was under all this pressure because there were rumors going around that he started the fire. Everyone's saying he did it. And he basically was just trying to, it's not entirely clear. Maybe he's trying to get his friend to sort of feel sorry for him because he's what the friend said that James Carver said was basically, I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted to scare people. And he was saying he wanted to kill himself and that he had been drinking the day that he made this alleged confession. So it sounded like he was in a lot of emotional turmoil. And if he did confess to this, it may have been a result of all this pressure that the police were literally following him around, like in unmarked cars. They're following his family around too, I believe. They were questioning like literally every person he knew, his coworkers, his friends. He couldn't get a new job without them talking to his coworkers at the new place. Like everybody is aware this is the guy the police think set the fire. They just can't get the piece of evidence they need to put him on trial. And you can imagine it going both ways, that maybe he did confess to this because he just wanted sympathy. It could have been that his words were misconstrued, that he said something and the friend thought it meant that he set the fire when that's not really what he said. It could be that she is, is lying. I'm not saying she's lying. I don't know. It could be that he said something and she didn't tell the police 2 years later, and her memory just got different. People's memories change over time. We don't know why she said this. I've actually tried to get in contact with this woman, but never been able to speak with her yet. Uh, and so I can't get her side of the story now, but it's certainly an open question whether James Carver did make these supposed confession, and if he did, it just it doesn't really line up with the evidence. So
That's the
I
real
don't,
problem. Yeah,
yeah,
and confessions. I mean, the chat's noting it too. I mean, we were kind of seeing it in the Karen Reed stuff too, whether it was a confession or not. There's so many times where it's a false confession. I mean, the evidence doesn't match up. If you can't prove they did it, it doesn't matter what is said, and especially on when it's a witness interpreting what they're saying. It's just you
yeah,
can't rely on
and
that. You can't that and like human memory does change, especially the longer you go. So all of these witnesses, it's so funny because we cover a lot of different things, but in the Karen Reed, we're seeing the same thing. Their memories change depending on how many times they testify and who they're
yeah,
speaking to over and over again. So it's just
yeah, and it doesn't even mean they're lying. It's just people's memories change, or like people can get loose with their words, and like
absolutely.
whatever. But I think one thing, if this case was to go on trial again, one thing that his lawyers would argue, that they have argued up to this point, is they're saying the fire didn't even start on the newspapers. So if the witness comes in and says James Carver confessed to starting the fire on the newspapers, they're going to say no, it started above this alcove above. The newspapers didn't catch on fire until later on in the fire, and there's no evidence that it started this way. And they have a witness who's going to come in and say the damage pattern is consistent with it starting up here and possibly drop down fire or something, and that's how it spread. And they'll say that nothing about this confession adds up. So whether it happened or not, it's not true that James Carver started the fire. And uh, and again,
Should
like I
go
mentioned
forward
earlier,
with
you
a
have to
retrial.
contend with. I'm sorry.
Are they going to go forward with the retrial? Are they actually Essex
So
County going to retry this guy after 35 years and all the evidence not looking good for them to get any kind of conviction? Are they actually going to go forward with it?
we don't know that yet. What we know is that they're appealing the judge's decision.
Okay.
Um, and so basically, they're going to argue that as a matter of law, this should be overturned, based on the law and the evidence that was already presented. And they have to prove essentially that the judge, I hope I'm not getting this wrong. I believe the legal standard is like abuse of discretion, meaning the judge has like a lot of discretion to make this decision. But if his decision is like so wildly out of step with what is necessary to overturn a conviction, they could overturn it. I think they're going to have a hard time winning their appeal because there's actually a similar case called Commonwealth v. Victor Rosario, who it was another case involving a false confession and evidence of bad forensic science to show that the fire was arson. And I can't remember when this was overturned. It might have been like 2016 or something. But a year or two ago, this guy Victor Rosario, after he got out of prison, he sued the town of, or sorry, the city of Lowell, I believe it was, and he got like, I don't know all the detail. It might have been like 13 or 14 million dollars settlement. So this stuff about they used to use BS stuff, forensics to prove arson is something that has been discussed before. I don't think it was necessarily the exact same scientific issue, but I think that the people on the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts, they're going to look at this and say, we have a credible expert. We have a judge who, he spent, a lot of time reviewing this case. He held a hearing. He listened to expert testimony, and actually, I didn't mention earlier. I should mention that the DA's office had their own expert come in and testify at this hearing. This hearing was last April, um, and their own expert said there's no evidence that the fire was started with a flammable liquid too. They brought in a Massachusetts state trooper, former Massachusetts state trooper, fire investigator, and he looked over the case too. He said, I also conclude there's no evidence of a flammable liquid. He did try to claim that the fire was still arson, that it was still started on these newspapers. But I personally did not find his testimony very convincing. He didn't really have anything. He basically just said it's possible, and he had no scientific studies. He didn't conduct any tests or anything. Whereas the Craig Byler, the witness who testified for James Carver, the fire safety engineer, he said they've actually done tests before, not like for this case, but just scientific testing in general. He said they'll have like a wooden walls, like a corner, and you put like a propane burner in the corner up against the wall, and you basically find out how big of a flame you need for the flame to spread to the wood. So for a fire to like spread to a building, if you think about it, like if you hold a lighter up to a block of wood, this isn't a lighter, it's like a dongle, but pretend it's a lighter. You hold it up to a block of wood, it's a small flame. A block of wood is hard to set on fire, right? You need like a powerful flame. The wood is going to turn black. The wood is going to turn black where you hold the lighter, right?
Yep.
But it's not going to catch on fire. It's not
Oh,
going to
it's
be
not going to be any flame.
So what he said is that they've done this testing before, and you'd need like a 5-foot tall fire for it to actually set like a wooden building on fire in a corner. And if someone set like a bundle of newspapers that's tied together on fire, remember, no evidence that there was a flammable liquid or anything. You set it on fire. The corners are going to burn for like a few seconds. They'll burn out. The fire is going to be really small. There's no conceivable way it would turn into this huge fire that's going to like spread to a building and cause those, those pictures I was showing earlier of the fire. Like you would need a big fire, and it would need to burn not just for a couple seconds, but for I think he said a sustained period of time, basically. So it's just it's very difficult for me to believe that the fire started this way. Um, uh, I don't know. Maybe if there was evidence that there was a flammable liquid, it could change things, but there's no evidence of that, so that's just speculation. Um, and but uh, can I solve Nancy Merson's murder? No, I think
Let's answer this one. What do you think about this one?
I I am not a police detective. I can't do that. But
Are there
what
any other thoughts on what actually happened to her? Like,
I mean, I haven't
have any
reviewed this
other
in detail.
reports?
I
Have you
just know
seen
that there's
anything on
no.
it? Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know who did it. I just know that there's no evidence connecting it to the fire, which is something people have speculated
How
about.
did she die? How did she die? Like, what's the
She was stabbed to death.
who stabbed? That's right. Okay.
Um, Another really tragic crime that hasn't been, no justice in that case. Um, And as far as I know, it's still open. I don't know. They may be looking for someone. I'm not sure. Don't have any insight into that. I just know that there's no evidence has come forward that James Carver is connected to it, or that anyone connected to the fire was responsible for it, or that there was a motive related to the fire.
How is
Um,
James now? How is he doing? Like he must, like when did he get out? He's out of jail now
he got
or
out in
prison.
February. So the case. This is actually an interesting. The case was turned over on December 23rd, and then the next day was Christmas Eve, and his lawyers went to the jail. And he, from what I understand, was like feeling kind of down that day. He was not in a good mood. I can imagine that Christmas isn't great when you're in prison, separated from your family. But his lawyer showed up, and he wasn't expecting it because they usually visit him. If they visit him in person, it's one of them usually, or they'll talk to him on Zoom or whatever. But it's Christmas Eve, and both of his lawyers are showing up in person, and they're talking to him in the private room, and he's like, do you have good news for me? And they're like, yeah, like we do, and they explained to him what happened. And he said that basically they said he started crying, and when he went back to his cell, he told me that I spoke to him for this article I wrote, and he said he went back to his cell, and he thought about his mother and his father and his older brother, all of whom have passed away, since he's been incarcerated. He thought about them, and he said he thought about God, and he basically just broke down and cried again, that he couldn't. I think it came as a shock to him, even though he'd been waiting for this ruling. He's um, been waiting for it for decades, and he has tried to get out of prison other times before, but none of the sort of attempts involved like scientific evidence like this one did. And this was the one that finally convinced the judge, there's something wrong here that, needs to be addressed. And so he didn't get out of prison right away, because what happens is, once your conviction is overturned, the DA's office can prosecute you again, which means you're still charged with the crime, which means, you're still waiting for a bail hearing. So he gets a bail hearing in February, and I'm gonna grab some pictures again real quick. There's a photographer from the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism, Derek Kuyumjian, who took some like really amazing photos of this
Great
hearing.
guy. I see Derek every once
Uh,
in a while. He's such a great guy.
yeah, and hold on, I have more of them than actually are published on the site. So let me show you guys some of these.
We did have a comment. They want to know what town this fire happened. It was Beverly, Massachusetts,
Beverly, yeah.
which
So
I know very well. This is the North Shore town. That is true. Beverly is true North Shore. That is as North Shore
yeah,
as it gets.
so you can see James Carver here, and as I mentioned, he's wearing headphones because he's got hearing issues. He's had a lot of health problems while he's been in prison. But in the middle is Lisa Kavanaugh, one of his lawyers. She's the director of the Public Defender's Office's Innocence Program. And to her right, or I'm sorry, to her left, to the picture's right, is Charlotte Whitmore, who's another James Carver attorney, and she is a staff attorney at the Boston College Innocence Program. So these are both lawyers who are kind of their main gig is getting innocent people out of prison. Um, and this is from the bail hearing where they got James Carver out of prison. And this is Judge Jeffrey Karp. He overturned Carver's conviction. Um, and these are the assistant district attorneys. The guy in the middle is the one who argued at the bail hearing, James Gubitosi. To his left is Catherine Semmel, who I think was sort of the main attorney on this. And you can't see her face, but to the right side of the picture is the other attorney. I think her name is Caitlin Shagru. They had three attorneys working on this case to keep this guy in prison. Um, and again, that's Judge Karp, who is, from what I can have been able to tell, is a very thoughtful judge. He asks a lot of questions and he pays very close attention, takes a lot of notes. He's like read, all the material. He seemed like a very thoughtful judge to me. And this is James Carver's daughter, who was born 7 weeks before he was arrested. Her name is Caitlin Verzi, and she is, now married and has kids of her own. Uh, James Carver's grandchildren. And in this picture is James Carver's ex-wife, Mary Jane Dempsey. They were that she's also, his daughter's mother. And Dempsey was, they were married at the time when this happened, but they got divorced like a couple of years after James Carver was convicted because, this like whole thing tore um, their family apart basically. And if you go back to when James Carver was convicted, this is from the Beverly Times. That's her on the right. She like screamed when he was convicted. Like she was always believed he was innocent, and she, couldn't believe that he was convicted of this, and just was like screaming, and the court officers had to drag her out. But she, came to this hearing to support James Carver because even though they're divorced, she's always believed he was innocent. She wanted to support him. This is another picture of James Carver with his daughter. She's, making a heart gesture at him. This was, well, I believe this picture was taken while the judge was in his chambers deciding on the motion. But the ADA, James Gubitosi, actually argued that James Carver, this guy in a wheelchair who has all these health problems, he's incontinent, he's incontinent, he's, hard of hearing, he's in a wheelchair, he can't walk on his own, was arguing that he's a flight risk because his family, who came to support him at this court hearing, might, whisk him away, to avoid facing the charges. But Judge Karp, sided with James Carver. So there's a series of photos. This is the moment that James Carver, right here, you can see his attorney smiling at him and he's just kind of staring ahead, vacantly. This is like the moment when the judge said, I'm allowing your motion for bail. Um, I'm sorry, I should say allowing your motion for being released without bail. So he didn't have to post bail. But he's like pressing his lips together, trying to hold his emotion in this picture. And his lawyer, Lisa Kavanaugh, is just smiling at him. She's got like a hand on his back, and he's looking over at her here. And you can't see it in the picture, obviously, but she nodded at him, just like saying, like, yeah, like this is really happening. You're getting out of prison. And here's a picture of his daughter smiling at him. And his ex-wife was like, could not believe it. She like gasped. You can see in this picture, she's like covering her mouth with her hand to cover her gasp. And her boyfriend has his arm around her. And then in this picture, she looks up at her daughter, like, just she's in shock. Like she couldn't believe this was happening. And uh, then they're holding hands, like this was such an emotional moment for them. Like if you think about it, James Carver was arrested um, shortly after his daughter was born. She grew up like her whole life basically with her dad in prison. She wrote to the judge, as a little girl, I had to go to the prison and I had to take my shoes off and go through a metal detector and have these people search me just so I could see my dad. And for me, this was like just how I grew up. It was, normal for
Prison.
me.
What prison was he held in? Is it
Quite a few
Walpole
of
or?
them,
Yeah,
several different prisons. He was at Old Colony
Colin.
at this time, but he was at a number of different prisons. I couldn't tell you all of them off the top of my head, but you can see in this picture he's starting to cry. He, like really reacted to this. He's wiping away his tears. Um, and Derek, the photographer, just did an amazing job
He
capturing
did phenomenal.
this
This is
moment.
unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see off to the right is his brother, who looks a lot like him, just with, glasses and a 5 o'clock shadow. But Bill was also wiping away his tears. But anyway, James Carver, he was there for maybe another 45 minutes or so. They had to do all this paperwork and they had to get him fitted with like a GPS monitor. Um, because remember, he's out of prison, but he could go
He's
on
gonna
trial.
flee in his wheelchair. Come on, that's so ridiculous.
Um, but here's his family. They're wheeling him. You can actually see me with the video camera off to the right, but he's getting wheeled down the ramp, and there's his ex-wife is hugging him, and he was just really happy to see her there. Um, and she was shouting at this moment, like, "I can't believe he's free." But there, one thing I did not get to talk about in the story is how many people were involved in this case, because when he shows up to court, he has two lawyers, right? But a lot of the people in this photo are law students who worked for uh, the Boston College Innocence Program with one of his attorneys, Charlotte Whitmore. And some of them also have worked at CPCS, the Public Defender's Office, with Lisa Kavanaugh. And, they're not like the primary lawyers on the case, but they're still helping with a lot of different, odds and ends as far as like investigating and reviewing and that kind of thing. So these cases, kind of they take a village. It's, you see in this picture, it's him with his two lawyers, but it's, his family who's supported him all these years. It's all these law students, and there's social workers who have helped him. They helped sort of plan what his release plan was going to be. um, One of the women who's in the front next to Charlotte Whitmore, she's wearing like a orange ish or like shirt. That's Sade Taylor. She's part of the Exoneration Network, and she gave James Carver. They raise money for exonerated people, um, and her brother is Sean Ellis, who was
Yes.
exonerated from a murder in Boston. He's
Oh,
one of the
poor.
co-founders. He's one of the co-founders. He's not here, but that's his sister, who's like a I believe, I can't remember. I think she's called like a social work organizer or something. But she helped him like get a laptop, a cell phone, get kind of set up with all that stuff, and sort of, it's a big deal to get out of prison. Like he literally he told me, like, I've never held a cell phone
Imagine
in my
never had
entire
a
life.
phone. Yeah, yeah. Doesn't
Yeah,
even
like,
probably know cable television. Never mind Netflix. uh,
yeah,
I just, what's he doing now? Does he live alone? Is he living with the state? Is he living with his daughter? Where's he living? Do you know?
so his daughter lives up in New Hampshire, and he's not allowed to leave the state. And I
Okay.
think it's their family's goal for them to eventually live together. But for now, he's living in what's called a residential care home, or sometimes called a rest home. And it's not a nursing home. Like, they don't have nurses there 24/7, but they have, staff who kind of, it's sort of like it's like an assisted living
Assisted
type
living.
thing, I guess. But he basically is, from according to court records, he's like a relatively independent guy. Like, he can move his wheelchair around. He can get around. He can, transfer himself to things. He can't like walk around or stand up for an extended period of time, but he can, like, he's strong enough with
Well,
his arms to move himself. Um,
must be
but he
happy.
needs help,
He's
kind of.
got to be happy,
Yeah,
a
he
little
needs.
happier now, right? Than he was.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's got to be some probably lifelong misery because of it. I mean, I can't imagine knowing that your whole life basically got pissed away over something that you didn't do. It just sucks, but at the same time, he's
Yeah.
got to be
Well,
happy that he's got at least a little bit of freedom for his last couple of
yeah.
years.
When
I got to think.
when I talked to him, the thing that he emphasized was, he said that the hardest thing about being in prison, and this is true whether you're guilty or innocent, but it's he lost family members while he was in prison. Like, his mom died in 2002, and his brother Bill Carver told me that it was his belief that their mother died at that age from a stroke. Um, in part because she had so much stress from, her son going to prison, and this trial was kind of like a media circus at the time. I mean, no, nobody's ever heard of it now, but at the time, all the local papers were covering it. There were like TV
Definitely.
reporters covering it. Um, and, a lot of people in the community believed he was guilty. I can't imagine, walking around and, people are looking at you or whatever, like, and just having to visit your loved one in prison and having them taken away from you, it's got to be really stressful. So she died in 2002, and James Carver was able to go to, uh, I think it was like a wake or something, but he um he was able to go to that, but he wasn't able to to be there while she was. I believe she was hospitalized beforehand. Like she had a stroke. She had a stroke, and then she didn't die immediately, but she died at some point after that, and he wasn't able to see her. I don't think. Um, if I'm if I if I might be getting that part wrong. I don't think he said. I think he said he wasn't able to see her until it was the funeral. But for his dad, he wasn't able to go to see his dad in the hospice center, and he wasn't able to go to the wake or the funeral. And he said to me he actually watched his father die on a Zoom call. And he said, I'll never forget that. Like he wanted to go to this facility and they wouldn't let him out. And I
That's
think that
hard.
he told me this was really hard. And then his brother, he had not Bill, the brother I previously mentioned, but he has an older brother as well, who died in June. So pretty shortly before he got out of prison, and he never got to go, spend time outside prison with his older brother, who he hadn't, and in addition, he and his wife, as I mentioned, got divorced. So that's not someone dying, but it's a different kind of, losing your family. And he had to see his daughter in like a visiting room, watch her grow up in a visiting room. And, um, but, and then on top of it, his grandkids, he's got three grandkids. I don't know when their birthdays are, but last I heard they were uh, 7, I think 9, 7, 9, and 12 was the oldest one. Um, and he had never seen his two younger grandchildren in person until he got out of prison. Um, can you imagine? Like you have a 7 and 9-year-old grandchildren, you've never been able to see them because his daughter visited him a lot in prison, but eventually it became really burdensome. She told me one issue is you have young kids, it's really hard to get them in because um, they're always saying, oh, you can't bring in that sippy cup or whatever, you can't bring in those diaper, whatever it is. They're giving her a hard time about bringing stuff in that she needs to take care of her kids. um, and on top of it, eventually a few years ago we had COVID and start, and then they added all these safety precautions, and then it makes it even harder. And on top of it, she lives in New Hampshire, and it's a long drive for her, and it's a lot of this life gets in the way. It wasn't that she didn't want to see him; it's just that it was,
This is hard for family members. They make it hard.
yeah,
It is hard. Um, that's why I asked where he was, being held in prison because, thinking about the family, how far do they have to travel to see him? Knowing she lived in Hampshire too, that's, um, I mean, the
and
thing is,
his
he's got
brother
to
was all the
feel,
way in.
I was
I
gonna
was gonna
say,
say his
he's got to
brother was
feel
all the
better
way in
now.
Michigan.
He's got to feel better now that he gets to see those grandkids and,
Yeah,
at least he's got
said,
the last few years. I mean, that is the silver lining in all of this, crappy story about what happened to him.
yeah. And he said that the first thing he wanted to do as well after he got out of prison was go to the cemetery where his parents and his older brother were buried. And um, I guess he probably didn't like literally mean, the second I get out of prison, but the day after his
He was
daughter
there.
brought her family to visit him, and his brother was, there from Michigan, and he visited as well. And they took him out, to like a Target, and we're just gonna buy you some stuff because you need stuff for your room. And he was kind of like, you know, wow, like I haven't been in like a store this big before, and he's not used to the like
Open
inflation. He was
space.
last
Yeah.
he he was in prison in 1988, and so just seeing prices was a shock for him, like how expensive stuff is. But they took him to the store and got him some stuff, and he's like, okay, what are we going to do now? And his daughter was like, we're going to take you to the cemetery like you wanted. And he was, like he started crying again. And they took him to the cemetery, and he spent, some time there. And he just spoke to his, he's a religious guy. He's Catholic, I believe, and also he has like a Buddhist practice in terms of like meditation and mindfulness. He said that's something he learned about in prison. But he speaks to his family members, and he told them basically, I'm finally home. And but since he got out of prison, um, he said it was pretty hard at first because I mean, one thing he didn't really specifically say this, but I can imagine is that he was young when he went away, and he's older now, and on top of it, he's not just older, but he's like got significant disabilities. He's in a wheelchair, which is something he didn't have to navigate the world in a wheelchair when he went to prison. So it's like a new phenomenon. Like he's been institutionalized, so he hadn't had to like navigate the world, as a free person, but also with these disabilities. But I think it was close to a week. It might have been around 5 days before he left the residential care home on his own. And he went to like a CVS, and he was like going down a hill, and he's like, oh my God, am I going to be able to get back up? And he's like, gets to the store, and he's like disoriented. He's like, how do I even find anything? And finally he just asks somebody like, hey, where is the thing I need? And he was able to do it, but it was like, it's it's an old, like it's something that it's basically a new experience for him just because of how long it's been since he's had to do anything like this on his own. And then he had another experience where it was the first time he went to a medical appointment with no one like with him. Um, and he, I think, took a bus or something, and he like missed the ride home because he was like got lost in the hospital, and he's like appointment ran late, and so he had to like get like a taxi voucher to get home. But it was just like it's just like when you get out of prison, it's not like I showed you those photos of him, triumphantly coming out of the courthouse, but like the story doesn't end there. It's like you have
What
to.
happens the next day and the next day and the next day after that?
Right.
It's definitely not easy,
Yeah. And
especially after
there
you've been
there
institutionalized for 36 years.
yeah.
It
And
sucks.
there's the boring stuff I didn't put in the story, which is like he's had all these like social workers helping him, and they've had to do stuff like make sure he's got a driver's license, and make sure, or not, I'm sorry, not a driver's license, but a state ID anyway, make sure he's got, all of his like state assistance programs that are going to help him because he can't, work right
You just can't
now.
work. Yeah,
And, he's um, just he's got to get all of the payments set up to make sure that he can stay in this residential care home. um, and so and just someone said it's like coming back from war. And yeah, like like when they have those prisoners of war come out, they don't even let them see their families right away. They'll like keep them for a little bit and have like psychologists talk to them and like make sure they're okay, and that they're like it's a traumatic experience. Even again, even if you're guilty, like that part is kind of irrelevant, really. Like just being institutionalized like that in that kind of environment it's a lot. It messes with your mind basically. It's like it's not just your body that's in prison, it's your mind that's in
that's
prison.
the
And when your
biggest thing.
body
The
gets out,
mind, right? The mind and the
yeah,
heart too. The mind and the
when
heart.
you're
The spirit.
yeah,
So It saps your spirit, it saps your mind, it saps your body. That's why they work out so much. It's all they have, you know. Um, this question came in from Foxacre Acer. Says, okay, so what is Mr. Carver's version of events? He doesn't really have a version because he wasn't
No, he
there, right? I
does.
mean,
His he had
what's his
his
version?
parent. Well, yeah, his that's exactly. His parents testified that he was actually asleep at the time that the fire happened, and that he he was asleep. And also, they said his car was blocked in the driveway, and he couldn't have even like got his car out without them
His
noticing.
version is he was at home. He wasn't there. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah, exactly.
They never found him there. There's no like, there was no gasoline. It's just like the whole thing is just, there's nothing to it.
Yeah,
It's just like
yeah, and
somebody said something to somebody, and we're gonna blame it on this guy. Like, cause they
yeah,
needed
and
somebody.
he
This was a big deal. All these people died. They needed to find someone to blame it on. Pin it on this guy, right? I mean, that's basically what happened here.
yeah, and it's what his parents testified to at trial, and when I spoke with him, it's what he said to me as well. He said something like, "I did 36 years for sleeping," um, and so um, I do want to talk about though, this fire was a big tragedy, irrespective of whether it was arson or not, and um, there was one there. So I mentioned there were 15 people who died in the fire, um, and three of them were connected to one family, and so I don't know exactly how many families were affected by this, but in one case it was three family members from one family. Um, and so at this bail hearing for James Carver, um, my understanding is that they didn't tell the family members until after his conviction was overturned, which is interesting because if I was a family member, I would have wanted to go to the hearing in April when they presented all the new evidence. I would have wanted to hear it for myself. But from what I've been able to gather from the people I've talked to, they did not tell the family members that this hearing was going to happen. But they did tell the family members about the bail hearing. And so one woman came to the bail hearing. Her brother, George Flynn, died in the fire at age 18. And George Flynn, uh, so her name is Tracy Lee Dalton. And both she and her brother, George Flynn, knew James Carver and his brother, Bill Carver. They were in like a drum and bugle corps together as kids. Um, and she told me a little bit about her brother. She said called him a loner. She said he liked to spend time with his family, but like didn't have a lot of friends. But she said he's into like drawing and building model ships and cars, and he likes electronics and stuff like that. And he had actually just recently moved to the rooming house before the fire because it was close to his job and close to where his grandparents lived. But he died, again, age 18, very young, and it's tragic that that happened. And I think she's carried a lot of grief about this her whole life, but she still believes James Carver is guilty. Um, and she told me like she read the judge's decision overturning the case, and she just said she doesn't agree with it. That um, she said, quote, he doesn't think, he referring to the judge, doesn't think that the fire investigators at the time did what they were supposed to do, but you're only supposed to get a bite at the apple once. If you're convicted, you're convicted. Um, and she did tell me she has some doubt, but she said it's like a very small percentage of doubt, but she's pretty convinced that he did it. And she told me she wants to forgive him someday, even though she believes he's guilty, just because she said like it's something she has to do for herself to kind of get over this pain of going through this experience is like, you know, uh, but she still believes he's guilty, and she attended the hearing. She was actually the only family member of a victim to attend the hearing in person. Um, she but I will say James Carver told me, and there I have found, I believe it was talked about at the trial as well, and that James Carver was friends with George Flynn and actually went to his funeral, I think, or his wake or his funeral. Um, And if I'm not mistaken, there was a newspaper article that said that when they read the indictment against James Carver in court, um, at his arraignment, he started like crying or something when they read George Flynn's name. Like, um, and he James Carver said, like I do feel terrible, like the fire was awful, but it's just he said I didn't do it. So like I do feel bad for the families, but I just want them to understand that like I am not responsible for this. And um there were some other family members who didn't attend the bail hearing in person, but they were able to listen in. There was like a phone line set up that you could call into. And this other woman, uh, her name is Julie Nickerson Benedicts. She was the sister of Rick Nickerson, the guy who they said James Carver had threatened the night before the fire. And she's also the person who had three family members die in the fire. So there was Rick Nickerson, who was her older brother. There was her younger brother, Ralph Nickerson, who was 9 years old at the time. He was the youngest the youngest victim of the fire at 9. And then her grandmother was named Hattie Wary, and she managed the rooming house. Um, and so her brother, Rick Nickerson, lived with their grandmother at the rooming house. He had moved there. Um, he, I think he served in the military for a while, and then he moved to Beverly. And he just was like, I want to live with my grandmother, and I'm going to get a job here. I think uh, I want to say he was working at like a McDonald's at the time or something, but he was trying to get his feet in the door and start living in Beverly, with his family there. And he was just interested in. I think he had visited her there and made some friends and stuff, and it was just kind of what he wanted to do with his life at that point. But um, he died, and then Ralph Nickerson, who was just 9 years old, died, and Ralph Nickerson did not even live there. He was visiting for 2 weeks, for the summer, just spending time with his family. And Beverly does some good fireworks displays. They have some stuff down there, so I would imagine they were planning to check out some of that stuff. And there's beaches in that area. I think that's kind of what he was there for. But all three of them died in the fire, and this has it's really affected Julie Nickerson Benedict's. She said she has anxiety, PTSD. She takes medication. Um, and I, real quick, let me put this up. Um,
That's really, I feel bad for those victims.
yeah. Um,
Three relatives, one, a child. It just, that's really,
Let me stick this up real quick.
this is a tough
Um,
situation in Beverly, Mass. I remember this happening. Horrible.
okay, so this, can we get this up? This is a newspaper article. You can see the three members of her family who passed away. This is Hattie Wary at the top. It says Ricky Nickerson. I heard he, from what I know, he went by Rick Nickerson, but that's him. It looks like it's hard to tell because it's like a low quality black and white photo, but I think he's wearing his military outfit in that picture. He's got like a hat on or something. Um, and then you can see Ralph Nickerson at the bottom, who's just a kid. And all three of these people, passed away, and it was really tragic. And uh, let me throw up one more image. This is my photo. Um, if you go to
I
Elliott and
see that.
Randall Street in Beverly now, it's actually a CVS. The building is torn down. I think it stayed up for a while. They were able to like remove the upper floors and keep it as like a one-story building or something. But they eventually tore it down, put a CVS there, and some people from the community, wanted to put this monument up to make sure that it wasn't forgotten. And if you go to the corner of the street there, you can see it, and it has the names and ages of all 15 people who died in the fire. Although even these 15 people are not all of the victims, because there are other people who were injured in the fire, and even if they weren't injured, they lost their home and they had to find new housing and their possessions got destroyed. And there's a man I spoke to. This is not in my reporting, but I can still mention this. I know I've talked to a guy who actually jumped out of a second story window. He didn't, he couldn't wait for the firefighters. He jumped down and he injured his legs, and I believe he had to be in a wheelchair for a number of months. And he also was missing an arm, not from the fire. He was in like a motorcycle accident. But if you can imagine, you're missing an arm and you can't walk. That's tough. Like, that's he did kind of bounce back from it, but he sounded like from what he told me that he had a pretty hard life as a result of this. Like he said it, he started walking again, but like he still felt pain, and it was difficult for him. Um, and I'll point out too that in terms of this fire, um, the, you know, one thing that I think is important to point out is that this fire, if it was an arson, or honestly, even if it was arson, may not have killed so many people if the building was different, like if it was safer. This was this was a wood frame building. It was primarily made of like flammable materials, like wood and like I think like fiberboard and stuff like that. Stuff that will catch fire real quick. And it was like an old design. It had in the inside of the walls didn't have what are called fire stops. It's like if you think about like how you close a door and so the fire can't get into the room, it's like that, but like inside the wall, kind of is the best way I can explain it. Like it's something that's sort of like if the fire gets in the wall, it's harder for it to spread. It takes longer for it to spread. It didn't have those. It did not have a sprinkler system. It had fire alarms, um, but it did not have sprinklers, which could have prevented the fires from spreading, or it could have given people more time to escape. Um, it didn't have some of these basic precautions. And technically, at the time, it was up to code. However, uh, they did pass a law at some point that would allow towns to mandate sprinkler systems in these types of buildings, but they didn't have that at the time. And there had been a fire department. Um, I think it was the fire department looked at the building, or someone from the city looked at the building, and basically said, "You might want to make some changes to this building, um, but you're not required to." Like, and the other big thing is in the stairway they had what's called an open stairway. So you open the door to get in, you walk up the stairs, and then you're just on the second floor. There's no like wall separating you. You don't have to go through a second door. So if the fire travels up the stairs, and this is what the investigators think happened in the case, there's no wall to slow it down and stop it or give firefighters time to put it out before it spreads. um, that just wasn't there. And then same thing when you get up to the third floor, there's no door there either. So this could just travel right up the building, and it's all this flammable material, and that's probably this fire. Apparently, the officials said it spread so quickly that six of the deceased victims were found in their beds. So these people were like asleep at the time, and they just died before they even could wake up and like
fight
get
it
out of their
off.
beds and do anything. um so it's it's tragic, um but it also speaks to the way that safety is like, what do we mean when we talk about public safety? Like a lot of times in we're talking about public safety sort of in the media or in politics. It basically means give the police more money, uh, let the police do more, give them more money. But in this case, just passing better building codes could have saved people's lives. And again, the thing is, like, even if this was arson, even if somebody started the fire, that doesn't mean that like these things are still important. Like having a sprinkler system can put out an arson fire just like it can put out an electrical fire, right? Like these when we talk about public safety, we need to think about the big picture, like safe housing for people,
Workplaces. I like safe
yeah, safe
workplaces too. It's
workplaces.
it's a big one. A big one. I
Yeah,
think it's ignored. I'm glad
yeah,
you
and we
covered
can't,
this.
yeah, we can't achieve safety solely by telling the police go arrest people whenever there's big tragedy. We need to like think big picture and prevent stuff from happening. And I just think that's something people should keep in mind when they hear stories like this.
I went and checked this out, this monument that there's two 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 what do we call these? Two pharmacies next to each other. One's CVS, I think the other one's Walgreens or something. I did go
I'm
check it
trying
out.
to remember what's in that
No.
intersection now.
Yeah, I believe
Um,
there's two, if I'm remembering this correctly. But I did go and see the, it's right next to the fence, which you have here, which is it's interesting because you'll walk right by it if you didn't know it was there, that's a spot.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not tiny, but it's not a huge monument. You could kind of walk by it and not realize it's there, but when I first wrote about the story, I kind of wrote about that and how like if we sort of these tragedies like happen and they just kind of they disappear from and you have this monument that you could walk by it, and the fact that it's sort of so modest but the tragedy is so huge, it just kind of like symbolic for the way that these things um fade into the background of our life. They're like history now that somebody has to go and research to find out about. And if you talk to people in Beverly, like I've done this, I walked around, just talking to people about it, and I walked in. My strategy was I looked at a sign for a building, and if it looked old, I figured maybe someone there was old enough to remember it. And I talked to people who lived in the area, and people are like, "Oh yeah, I remember that fire," and they're like, "Didn't some guy get convicted of it or whatever?" Like they didn't know all the details, but people remember stuff like this happening. But all the details of it kind of disappear if nobody's talking about it. And it was a big project to work on this because I had to go to we talked about this last time. Like I had to get like the microfilm out of the library and scan all of it, and I had to go to the court and scan all these court records and all this stuff. So like this is a lot of work. I've been working on this for like 2 years now or something. And it's these stories about like wrongful convictions and sort of these historical tragedies. They take a lot of work to research, but it's gratifying to be sort of a small part of it, just documenting it and um, getting to know people who are involved in it in different ways. And I feel empathy for every person involved in this story. Who was affected by the tragedy, whether it was James Carver and his family, whether it was these people who lost family members, whether they think he's guilty or not. They all suffered in different ways for this. And I, want to acknowledge all of the pain that this fire and the subsequent criminal investigation and trial and et cetera, that all of that caused. Yeah, someone said I wasn't even born. What someone asked, was I
I
even
was.
born? And no,
I was
I,
kicking around. I remember this because it's funny because Candy Hart said stay out of my neighborhood. I was born in Beverly, so I had my grandmother lived in Beverly at the time in 1984. So I used to visit. It wasn't my grandmother actually; it was my great grandmother. Excuse me, but my other grandparents lived in Danvers. So like I was always in this area back then, and I do remember it. I do remember this fire, and it was just like every front page, like Channel 4, Channel 5, everybody covered this. This was like, and it changed. I think one of the things about the victims too, like the people who died, their families, like I think, like the only silver lining I think they get out of this is that the rules change. That the zoning boards, if you have 10 units, 50 units, the sprinklers are there. There's no way you're getting around what Andrew talked about is like the fire doors and the fire breaks in the walls. Like you got to have that now. There's no way that you're getting around that if you're building any project in Massachusetts or pretty much anywhere, I think, fires like this, like that, it changed things. Like you got to have sprinklers.
Yeah, and actually, some of the family members sued the actually, it's very complicated because they sued various people. They sued the owner of the property. Some people sued the city. Some people sued, I believe, the electrician who installed the fire alarm system. Um, but basically, various claims of negligence. And what ultimately happened was, I believe, the only people who paid anything out was the estate of the building owner because I believe he passed away like within a few years of the fire and before they settled the lawsuit. Um, and it basically what they got was the insurance payout for the fire that the building owner got, and it was I couldn't tell you what it is off the top of my head, but it was divided up among so many people that it was barely any money. Like wrongful deaths. People can get sometimes like millions of dollars. For a wrongful death, and like the guy I mentioned who jumped out of the building and hurt his legs, I can't tell you exactly how much he got, but I want to say it was just a few $1,000s. You know, and I don't even know if that would cover all of his medical bills and stuff and his physical therapy and all that stuff. It certainly wouldn't, make him whole if these are like lifelong injuries that have affected him. Um, and just being out of work for all that time and stuff, a few $1,000s is not going to cut it. And I don't know what the state of the law is now in terms of like what kind of payout you get, but at the time, basically, they just got this insurance payout, divvied up among a whole bunch of people, and I think that hopefully we can I don't want to like speak out of my lane because I don't really know a lot about this stuff at the moment, but I would hope we could come up with something better than just, well, we'll give you what money there is, and it doesn't make you whole, whatever. Like we need a system that if
Supports
if the
victims like
building if
that.
the building isn't safe, somebody's got to pay, whether it's the
Yeah.
state or the city, whatever.
Or
Like
even
a fund.
charity. Like I wish
Yeah.
we could have helped those people, like all of those family members and family. I think if it would happen today, there would be some type of charity fund for them. People would
Oh yeah,
step
there'd be
up.
like
I
a
feel like
GoFundMe for all of
yeah.
them, but we didn't have that
I
back
mean,
then.
maybe we are a little better that way. The one good thing about technology too, like if the city doesn't step up, the people will. Like you
Yeah,
do have that
well,
option.
I think there were some churches and stuff raising money at the time, but again, like we're talking 15 people died, people get
Exactly.
injured, they've inhaled smoke or they've jumped out of the second story window and hurt their leg, whatever, various injuries. Um, like I don't even know if the money that gets raised is enough to pay for 15 people's funerals and stuff. It's like the scale of a tragedy like that is massive. We're talking about so many people affected by it. Um, and there's so much more about this story. Like if the story you shared that I wrote is it's more about James Carver, it's more about the people, the emotional elements of the story in terms of like what does all this mean to James Carver, to the victims' families. But the initial story I wrote about that, which it's linked at the end of that story, but I can also just stick it in the chat if people are more interested in uh, actually, let me send it to you, Mike, because I
It's in the chat right now. It's pinned at the top. We've been
no,
linked in a couple.
the one I just sent you. Can you stick that one in the chat too?
Is
The
it? Did I do
second
it already?
story.
Oh, is it a
This
follow
is
up?
no, this is the first story I wrote. This one gets more into the evidence than
Okay.
the more recent one. If people are more
Did
interested in that,
you said it in the oh, I see a private
it's in
chat.
the private chat. I'm not logged into my YouTube. I don't think
I can get
so.
it. I can put it in there.
Oh wait,
No
hold on.
worries. All right.
I think I got it. Sorry.
Science proves man convicted of worst murder in mass history.
Yeah, can you stick that in the chat for me?
Oh yeah.
This one,
Well,
if people are more interested in like the evidence of this case, this goes into it in more detail. And one thing that I didn't talk about that I don't know, I don't think we have time for this, but there's like more to this. Like James Carver's trial attorney, the guy who represented him back in 1989, had like a serious drug and alcohol
oh,
problem at the
that's
time,
right.
and
Yeah.
and there's more. I mean, just read it. Like
I
it's a
just,
wild
I just hired
story.
an attorney,
And
and that's all I kept thinking about is like, I gotta make sure the guy's not like some kind of drug addict or something, or like, oh, it's just funny
yeah,
because I mean, you
and
never
of
know who
course,
you're gonna get, right? I mean, Jesus
of,
Christ, that the poor
of
James Carver.
yeah, and of course, I have empathy for people who have drug and alcohol
Yeah,
addictions.
but you
Like,
don't want it to be your lawyer when you're facing a
yeah,
murder charge.
exactly. Yeah, like maybe if you've got a parking ticket or something,
Uh,
whatever. But if
Maybe
you're
if they
facing,
didn't sell any cars that day, no one would give a shit. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's
um,
just that's a rough one too. I want to thank you for
yeah,
being here tonight. We got it pinned in the chat. People could definitely check that other, the initial story on it, and they can follow you. I hope they do subscribe to your Substack. You can definitely, if you're, haven't followed Andrew before, definitely put your email in there. Subscribe to him. Any final thoughts you want
absolutely.
to share tonight, Andrew, before we get going?
Well, couple things. One, I just want to thank all the people who talked to me when I've been working on this story. And uh, two, there's more. I'd love to learn about this. I've never been able to speak to the trial prosecutor. The last couple times I got him on the phone, he literally hung up on me when I said like first time I was able to speak to him, he said basically I don't want to talk to you. And the last couple times I got him on the phone, I call him because there are developments in the case, not because I'm trying to bug him. Like I called him after the case was overturned and he hung up on me. I called him after James Carver got out of prison and he hung up on me again. I've never been able to speak to him. There's elements of the case I'd love to learn about, like who made the anonymous phone call to the police about James Carver. I have some theories, but no solid, evidence one way or another. So there's, for me, I hope I can learn more about the story eventually. I'm going to still be covering it because of the ongoing appeal and the possibility of a third trial. Um, and maybe I'll be back on here to talk about some of that stuff when it happens. But just I want to say check out my work. It's if you Google the mass dump, you can find me, or you can search andrewqmr.substack.com, um, and you can read the most recent story I wrote about this. You can read some of the other ones I've written about the hearing in April. I've written just kind of an overview of the case that is the one that Mike just shared. Um, and if I just want to emphasize how much work this was. It was a lot of work. And if you appreciate this, you can sign up for a paid subscription to my newsletter, or there's some links to like my PayPal and stuff in there if you prefer to do it that way. But anybody who wants to support me, I would be tremendously grateful to you because, again, a huge amount of work, but still, despite the amount of work it was, it's been incredibly gratifying to work on just because of what an amazing story it was. And that's why I heard about this story from reading a Beverly Times, or I'm sorry, Salem News. Beverly Times is gone. Salem News article about this in July of, I think, 2023. And it was just like a really short, blurb that kind of summarized the case, and that immediately was like, I was like, there's something to this story here, and I just became invested in it. The more I learned, the more invested in it I became, and it's been just really gratifying to kind of be a part of it and to speak to all these people and to be able to tell this story. And I want to keep working on it. And I hope people will keep following along with it as I continue to do so. And again, Mike, thank you for having me, and thanks to all the people who have been listening. And if there's any questions too, I can stick around a little bit more. But
Thank you so much for being here tonight, Andrew. I hope people do follow you on Substack, and it's pinned at the top of the YouTube chat. So anyone who wants to follow up and find out more info, it will definitely be pinned there. I thank you so much for being here, Andrew. You're also on a Twitter X. I don't know if you use that as much anymore. There's some other
I don't
channel.
really use
Where
Twitter
are
as
you?
much.
Where are you in
I'm
social
on.
media?
I usually use Blue Sky these days. It's if you search Andrew Quemere or Andrew QMR, you'll probably be able to find me. Um, I very occasionally post on Twitter, but I've kind of stopped since certain person bought it out and turned it into a piece of shit. But uh, if you just want to read my writing, you can just subscribe to the newsletter, and you don't even have to worry about all of my ranting and raving on Blue Sky about other stuff. But I stay tuned too, because there's I don't know when it's coming out, but I have some other stories I'm working on that are similar to this. In terms of wrongful conviction type stories that I don't want to name any names because they're not like close to being published yet, but it's stuff I'm working on and I hope to eventually publish. But um, yeah, and again, there's just so much about the story that I haven't said that's in the stories if you go and read them, and there's more that I haven't even said in those stories that hopefully someday I will be able to publish. But again, thanks for having me.
To hear from you soon with some updates. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it again sometime.
That's Andrew Quemere. You can follow him on Substack. We got it pinned at the top of the chat. I want to thank everyone who's been supporting and following the Young Jerks, and especially the support over the last couple days with this GoFundMe that we started to. That was just amazing over the last 24 hours to see all the support. We're up to $7,233. I just want to thank everyone for that as well. I want to thank our moderators, Sarah and Shock and Horror, who's been posting the links tonight. MJ has been active in the chat. I saw her there as well. I want to thank Stephanie, Jen O, Scott McGinnis, our moderators, our mod team. They always are very helpful in the chat, but with me too. We got our little private chat, and they help me with a lot of stuff, especially some of the legal stuff I've been going through. It's been good to be able to bounce things off with them. So I'm very appreciative of our team with the Young Jerks and our whole family, everyone who follows us and watches us and comments here. I want to thank you so much. I'm not sure when our next show will be. We'll see. I'm probably going to take off tomorrow. We'll see. I don't know. There's a couple of things I've been watching. I might want to pop off on a solo show. We'll see. I don't know. But I may take it off and definitely be covering Karen Reed on Tuesday morning. But if you're looking to get in touch too, if you did give a donation to our defense fund, the Young Jerks, we can send you some stickers too. The email address is at the bottom. Just send us an email with your mailing address. It's mjcboston1@yahoo.com. All right, I'll see everyone probably Tuesday. We'll see. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew, for being here. We'll see you soon. And like Glenn Lake says, we may have to put this on a shirt. May the circles of jerks be unbroken. Or is it the circle? Should it be the circle? May the circle of jerks be unbroken, or the circles. I don't know. Whatever, which way it is, either way, I like it. Let's keep this circle of jerks unbroken. Till next time, folks. I'll see you. Thank you.